The morning sun rose slowly above the quiet gray hills. The light touched the tall towers of the city and turned their metal walls to gold. Far below those towers, in the great training grounds of the kingdom of Aurelius, a young soldier named Ethan Cole stood in a line with hundreds of others. His hands were steady on his rifle, his boots pressed evenly against the ground, and his eyes looked straight ahead. He'd been awake for hours, long before the bell rang for duty, because he could never rest when the air smelled like rain and metal. To him, that smell always meant change, and change rarely came softly. Ethan was not famous. He was not the strongest or the smartest, but he had something clear in his heart that even his commanders could not name: a calm fire. When others grew afraid, he grew quiet. When others doubted, he looked forward. The men in his unit often called him stubborn, but they liked him for it. He listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke, it was usually something worth remembering. The kingdom of Aurelius had risen after a century of wars and storms. People had once lived in fear of endless fighting, but a woman named Queen Leora brought peace. Her rule was strong and fair. She cared for her people as a mother would, but her strength on the battlefield was said to equal that of 10 captains. She ruled from the citadel of Solara, a shining city that seemed to float between sky and earth. Ethan had seen the queen only once, from far away, during a parade after a great victory. She had worn silver armor, a crown of blue crystal, and a calm smile that hid deep power. Soldiers spoke of her with respect and fear mixed together. Some called her the Iron Queen, others called her the Light. Ethan thought she looked lonely, but he never said that aloud. Now the kingdom was preparing again for war. It's not against foreign enemies, but against rebels, men and women from within their own borders, who wanted to take power for themselves. The High Council said they fought in the name of freedom, but the truth was darker. They wanted the old days of greed and shadow to return. The queen had sworn never to let that happen, and every able soldier had taken an oath to protect her promise. Ethan's unit was ordered to the outer plains, where the rebel forces had gathered. The plains stretched for miles, flat and gleaming under the sun. Once it had been farmland, but years of conflict had burned it into empty land where nothing grew. Their camp stood near an old stone bridge, battered and cracked but still holding. The men joked that the bridge would outlast all of them. That night, as he sat by the campfire, Ethan cleaned his weapon and watched the sparks rise into the dark. Around him, soldiers laughed, traded stories, and shared what little food they had left. Beside the camp, tents glowed softly, and the distant hum of engines filled the air. Ethan thought of home, a small house in the hills, a mother who always asked too many questions, and a sister who had written him a letter 2 months ago that he still carried folded inside his jacket. He wondered if she would ever see him again. Then he pushed the thought aside. There was work to do, and fear was a poor friend to keep. The next day came heavy with clouds. The rebels were moving fast, and the queen herself was said to be riding from Solara to join the front line. Soldiers whispered in awe. It was rare for a ruler to stand so close to danger, but Queen Leora never ruled from a throne when her people were at risk. Ethan's commander gave orders with a hard voice. "Hold the bridge. Do not retreat. The queen is coming." The words filled the men with strange pride. To fight for a living legend was something all of them would remember, whether they lived or died. As the first sounds of battle rumbled in the distance, Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle and breathed deeply. The smell of metal and smoke returned. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy, drumming on armor and ground alike. It felt his heart beating faster, but did not move. Around him, the soldiers waited for the enemy to appear, each man a shadow against the gray sky. Somewhere far across the plains, a banner with the mark of the queen began to rise. Even through the rain, its light caught the horizon like fire. Ethan did not know then that this day, which began with routine drills and simple orders, would be remembered in the songs of the kingdom. He did not know that his name, once lost in the ranks, would soon be spoken beside that of Queen Leora herself. But fate had a strange way of choosing its heroes. And in the quiet before the storm, as he stood soaked in the rain, Ethan Cole began to feel that whatever was coming, it would change everything. The rain did not stop. It fell harder as the clouds turned darker, covering the sky with shades of steel. Ethan stood near the old stone bridge with his unit, boots sinking into wet ground. The wind carried the smell of smoke and oil. Far away, rolling thunder mixed with the echo of cannons. The battle had begun on the horizon. Could see flashes of light where the rebels were advancing. They came like a swarm, their banners torn and colors lost. It was chaos made of sound and fire. The plain that had been empty the day before was now filled with shouting, the clashing of metal and the cries of men. The soldiers of the Queen held the bridge with steady hearts, because none dared to fail when they knew she was on her way. Ethan wiped the rain from his face, his fingers growing cold around his rifle. Thought of his sister again for a quick moment, then focused on the field in front of him. The order was clear. Hold the bridge, no matter what. His commander's voice had carried more than duty, carried fear disguised as courage. Everyone knew that if the bridge fell, the rebels would pour through to the capital. The first wave hit like a storm. Men shouted, weapons flashed, and the solid ground turned slick with mud. Ethan fired again and again until his arms ached. Nearby, one of his friends, a boy named Leo, stumbled after being hit in the shoulder. Without thinking, Ethan ran to him, grabbed his arm, and pulled him behind cover. The noise was deafening. Explosions shook the air like thunderclaps. But Ethan did not stop, kept fighting, his movements guided by instinct, the world around him blurring into sound and fire. And then he saw her. Through the haze of smoke, a line of horses appeared, their armor shining faintly even in the rain. At their front rode a woman in silver, her presence bright and commanding. The Queen had come. Her banner, gold on white, cut through the chaos like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Soldiers on both sides slowed for a moment, stunned by the sight. She led from the front, not far behind her knights, her sword steady even as the ground trembled. Ethan felt his chest tighten. The stories had not lied. She looked both fierce and calm. Her face was wet from rain and battle dust, but her eyes burned with purpose. As she shouted orders, her voice carried above the storm. The soldiers rallied at once, forming tighter lines, their courage renewed. The rebels tried to push back, but every step they gained, the Queen's guard took back twice as many. Her presence seemed to draw light itself. Ethan could barely keep his eyes from her as he fought, not out of awe, but out of something he couldn't name, something that felt like belonging to history. Hours passed before the line finally steadied. The rebels began to fall back, leaving smoke and broken machines behind. But victory had come at a cost. The plain was littered with fallen men and burning metal. The rain kept falling, washing the blood into the gray soil. Ethan moved through the wreckage, helping the wounded. He no longer felt the weight of fear, only the strange quiet that followed battles. His hands trembled as he tied bandages and dragged men to cover.
Ow.
Then he heard someone call his name. Corporal Cole. His commander waved at him, shouting over the roar of the storm. The Queen is approaching. Clear the path. Ethan turned and saw her again, this time on foot. Her armor was scratched and streaked with mud, but she held her head high. Guards moved with her, carrying flags and torches despite the wind. As she crossed the bridge, soldiers bowed, some falling to one knee out of instinct. Ethan stood still, not sure what to do. She walked past him, paused, then turned her head to look at him directly. Her eyes met his. For that brief moment, the noise of battle vanished. It felt as if time had stopped just for them. She looked at him not as a queen to a soldier, but as a person seeing another human being who had stood his ground.
Oh.
Then she nodded once, small, but clear. He saluted quickly, his throat too dry for words. She moved on, leading her people toward the next line of defense. That night, the fires of the battlefield lit the plains like a strange red dawn. Soldiers worked in silence, tending to the wounded and gathering their fallen friends. Ethan sat by a broken wall, his uniform torn and soaked. His body was numb, but his mind was burning with thoughts. He remembered the faint nod of the Queen, the calm look in her eyes. And for the first time since the war began, he felt something new. It was not pride exactly. It was something deeper, a spark that whispered that fate had turned its gaze on him. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. But deep inside, he sensed that the day's battle was only the beginning of something far greater, something that would soon change his life, the Queen's and the kingdom itself. The morning after the battle was quiet and gray. The rain had stopped, leaving the plains covered in mist. Smoke still rose from broken machines and burnt tents. The air smelled of wet earth and metal. Ethan walked slowly between the lines of wounded soldiers, helping where he could. The night's noise had faded, replaced by silence that felt heavy and strange. His hands were sore and bandaged, his body covered with bruises. He had not slept at all, but he did not feel tired. His thoughts kept returning to the same moment again and again, the look in the Queen's eyes when she had paused beside him on the bridge. It had not been the cold gaze of royalty looking down at a soldier. It had been something else, something human. There had been awareness, respect, and curiosity mixed together. He tried to push the memory away, but it stayed. He told himself that she probably did not even remember his face. How could she, among hundreds of soldiers? Yet deep down, he felt that she had seen him clearly for that fleeting instant. By noon, the Queen's column had returned to the great citadel of Solara. The soldiers were given rest, but only a few were called to the inner halls for recognition. To Ethan's surprise, his name was among them. When the officer read it aloud, he thought at first that it was a mistake. He looked around waiting for someone to laugh, but no one did. The officer only said, "The Queen has ordered your presence. You leave at once." Ethan cleaned his uniform as best as he could and followed the escort through the city gates. Solara rose before him like a dream of glass and stone. High bridges of white metal arched across the rivers, and lights gleamed in every tower. People stood along the streets to watch the soldiers march past. When they reached the citadel walls, Ethan's heart beat faster. The gates opened with a deep sound, revealing halls wider than any he had ever seen. Inside, marble floors shone under lanterns that glowed with soft blue light. Servants moved quietly between pillars, carrying scrolls and vials of medicine. Somewhere far beyond, music played faintly, like wind through silver strings. Ethan felt small and lost in that vast and perfect place. He was led into a chamber filled with council members. Men and women in long dark robes sat at a curved table. Their eyes were sharp and cold, watching him as if studying a puzzle. Before he could speak, a voice rose, a gentle but firm voice that silenced the room. "Bring him forward." Ethan turned. The Queen was standing near the high window, rays of sunlight falling across her silver armor. Her hair was tied back, a single strand of it glinting like gold. She did not wear her crown now, only a thin band of steel around her forehead. When she spoke again, her tone carried both warmth and strength. "You are Corporal Ethan Cole," she said. "You stood at the bridge when the line broke." "Yes, Your Majesty," he answered quietly. "I saw what you did," she continued. "You saved men when others ran. You held the line without retreat. You showed courage without command. I remember your face." The hall went silent. Some council members exchanged quick looks. Ethan froze in place, not knowing what to say. The Queen's eyes stayed on him, calm but bright. Then she turned to the council and said the words that would be carried into legend. "I claim that young human soldier as mine." It was a tone of ceremony, not possession. In the royal traditions of Aurelis, these words had a sacred meaning. They marked a soldier chosen to serve not just the throne but the Queen's own guard, bound by oath to her direct service. The council stirred, their whispers growing louder. Ethan's heart pounded. He could hardly understand what was happening. One of the older councilmen spoke with clear protest. "Your Majesty, this is not proper. The order of succession forbids personal claim outside the noble ranks." The Queen's voice cut through the noise. "Our laws speak of worth, not of birth. He proved his worth in blood and loyalty. I will not argue this." The room fell silent again. No one dared to continue once she had spoken. She turned back to Ethan. "From this day forward," she said, "you will no longer serve a regiment. You will serve beside me. You will act as my protector, advisor when asked, and companion in arms." "Do you accept, Corporal?" Ethan could barely speak. His voice was faint but steady. "I accept, Your Majesty." The faintest smile touched her lips. "Then rise, Ethan Cole of the Queen's Guard." When he stepped forward and knelt, she placed her hand on his shoulder. A wave of quiet passed through the chamber. For the first time in his life, he truly felt seen not as a nameless soldier, but as someone chosen for something greater. Later that evening, After the hall emptied and the torches burned low, Ethan walked out into the courtyard. He looked up at the tall towers glowing in the dusk and tried to understand what his life had become. Only yesterday, he had fought for survival in the rain. He carried the word of the Queen herself. Somewhere in his chest, a quiet fire lit, one that would not fade again. He knew the journey ahead would test every part of him, but at that moment, standing beneath the night sky, he felt ready for whatever fate had planned. Ethan woke the next morning inside the royal quarters, still half in disbelief. The walls around him were made of white stone that caught the light and turned golden. Through the window, he could see the whole city of Solara stretching far outward, shining under the clean morning sky. For a long while, he simply stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had changed. A day ago, he had been only another soldier. Now he was bound by oath to the Queen herself. When a servant brought his new uniform, he touched it with care. It was made of fine black cloth trimmed with silver. On the right shoulder was the mark of the Queen's Guard, a golden crest shaped like the rising sun. Had never owned anything so fine in his life. The servant bowed and left without a word. Ethan dressed quietly and looked at himself in the mirror. Still felt like the same man, but the reflection looked somehow different, stronger but uncertain. He was called to the Queen's chambers soon after. 2 guards opened the doors, and he stepped inside. The room was vast and filled with calm light from high windows. Books lined the walls and maps were spread across a wide table. The Queen stood by the window, studying the sky as if reading something invisible within it. When she turned to face him, her expression was calm, but her eyes searched him closely. "So you came?" she said softly. "Does the armor feel heavy?" He smiled slightly and answered, "It fits, Your Majesty. But heavy things often carry meaning." She seemed pleased by that answer. "Good, you will need both strength and sense to walk beside me. The council is uneasy about my choice, and there are those who would test you." Ethan bowed his head. "I will serve with honor." She studied him for a moment longer, then walked toward the table. "The court lives on ceremony," she said. "I live on truth. What I saw in you on the battlefield was not skill alone. Something even commanders can forget. You cared for those around you, even when you knew you might not survive. That faith in others is worth more to me than polished speeches." He listened carefully, uncertain what to say. Her words carried warmth, but also a kind of sadness, like someone who had seen too many betrayals. The Queen moved closer, stopping just a few steps away. "From now on, you will stand by my side wherever I go. You will speak when asked, and watch when others forget to see. You may fail in strength, but never in heart. Do you understand this command?" "I do, my Queen," he said with quiet certainty. For the first time, she smiled fully, and it changed her face. The sharp edges of power softened into something human and kind. "Then your duty begins." The following days were unlike anything Ethan had known. He was trained again, not for battle, but for court life. He learned how to move through royal meetings, how to read the small signs of danger in people's eyes, and how to remain silent when silence spoke louder than words. Noblemen eyed him with curiosity, some with open dislike. To them, he was a commoner who had stepped into places meant only for bloodlines and wealth, yet the Queen did not care. When someone questioned her choice, she answered that courage did not ask for titles. Ethan came to understand that she carried a burden far worse than any sword. Every day she faced advisors struggling for power, noble lords whispering for favor, and hidden plans meant to weaken her rule. He saw how she hid her exhaustion and carried the kingdom's weight alone. Slowly, he began to see her not only as his queen, but as a woman who had given her life to the people, trading every moment of peace for duty. One evening, when the sky turned red with sunset, Ethan found her in the garden outside the citadel. She stood among the roses, watching the light fade over the hills. When she saw him, she said, "Do you ever miss the quiet of the front lines?" He nodded. "Sometimes, yes, it was simpler. There you knew who stood with you and who against you." She picked a single rose and turned it in her hand. "Here, the love of men is not measured in open acts, but in silence and deceit. You are lucky to see the truth as plainly as you do." He wanted to answer, but he also knew that anything he said might sound foolish. Still, he spoke gently. "Power can wound more deeply than war. You stand in storms no soldier could face." She looked at him for a long time, then smiled faintly. You understand more than most who have studied years for this life." Before she could say more, the sound of hurried footsteps came from behind. A messenger arrived, breathless. "Your Majesty, the outer provinces have risen again. There are fires along the northern road." The moment of calm vanished. The queen gave a short nod. "Prepare the guard. We leave at dawn." As the messenger ran off, she turned back to Ethan. Her calm had returned, but her voice carried resolve. "It seems peace will not stay with us. Not yet." Ethan stood straight, his gaze steady. "Then I will walk beside you again wherever you go." And in that instant, under the blood-red sunset, their shared promise was sealed. Whatever battles lay ahead within courts or on battlefields, they would face them together. The storm was rising once more, and they were ready to meet it. The next morning, the city of Solara was already awake before dawn. The streets were alive with soldiers preparing for movement, carts rolling, and horses stamping against the cobblestones. The queen's flag rose high above the citadel tower, bright even in the pale morning glow. Word had spread quickly. The queen herself would ride north to face the new wave of rebellion. People lined the gates to see her pass, their cheers filled with hope and fear at the same time. Ethan stood beside her as she mounted her horse. He'd grown used to standing close enough to hear her voice, but far enough to guard her space. She wore light armor now, made not for ceremony, but for war. When she looked at him, her voice was calm. "We ride to protect what we built. Remember, this time the danger hides not just in battle, but in betrayal." He nodded, gripping the reins tighter. The memory of her words stayed in his mind as they rode out of the city gates. The army stretched across the plain like a moving sea of silver. The early wind carried the faint smell of dust and dew. For a while, there was peace in the rhythm of hoofbeats and the steady sound of thousands marching together. After 3 days, they reached the northern valley. Their smoke rose from small villages that had been attacked. The rebels were not strong enough to win an open battle, so they moved like shadows, striking at farms, stealing supplies, and fleeing before soldiers could catch them. The queen ordered her army to split into smaller units to guard the people and roads. She herself led a smaller guard of 50, including Ethan, to track the rebel leader rumored to hide in the valley. At dusk, they reached an old fortress, its walls broken and overgrown with vines. The place was silent, except for the wind moving through empty halls. The soldiers checked each corridor, their footsteps echoing softly. When all seemed quiet, Ethan felt something uneasy. He had felt that kind of silence before, just before ambushes and past battles. His hand moved to the hilt of his sword. He turned just in time to see movement on the walls above them. "Attack!" he shouted, and arrows rained down. The soldiers scattered for cover. The queen drew her blade, the silver edge flashing. Rebel fighters poured from the shadows, shouting wild cries. The fight was fierce and close. Ethan stayed near the queen, blocking anyone who came too close. She fought without fear, her movements fast and sure. Together they pushed through the rebels toward the narrow stairway that led to the upper wall. Halfway up, a shout cut the noise. "They're behind us," cried one of the guards. Ethan turned, saw the danger, and moved quickly. He grabbed the queen's arm and pulled her behind a stone arch, just as an explosion shook the wall above them. The blast thundered through the fortress, throwing smoke and dust in all directions. Ethan's ears rang, and for a moment he could hear nothing. When the smoke cleared, he saw the rebels running, some shouting retreat orders. The queen stood unharmed beside him, her face pale but calm. Her eyes met his for a moment that felt heavy with meaning. "You have saved me again," she said softly. "I owe you more than duty. I only did what honor required," he answered, though his heart beat fast. By nightfall, the battle ended. The rebels were defeated, their leader captured. The queen's flag rose over the broken tower, waving in the fading light. Soldiers cheered, but their voices sounded strange in the stillness. So many had fallen, and the valley smelled of smoke and ashes. In the quiet after victory, the queen walked among the wounded, helping as she could. She spoke gently to each man, her hands steady. Ethan followed close, watching how every soldier she touched seemed to draw new strength. He realized then that her power did not come from armor or crown. It came from the way she cared for those she led. When they returned to Solara days later, the city bells rang for them. Crowds filled the streets, throwing flowers as the queen and her guard passed. On the citadel balcony, she stood before her people, the evening light behind her turning her hair to gold. Ethan stood just behind her, watching as she raised her voice so all could hear. "This kingdom was not saved by bloodlines or crowns," she said. "It was saved by courage, by hearts that refused to bow. Today, we stand united because one man reminded me that loyalty still lives in every hand that fights for good." She turned slightly toward Ethan. "If I claim him as mine, it is not as ruler over servant, but as one life joined by faith to another. Let every man and woman here remember that no heart is too small to carry greatness." A deep cheer rose from the crowd, rolling like thunder. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from pride, but from quiet wonder. The queen glanced at him again and smiled faintly. He returned the smile, understanding at last that his journey had not been to seek glory, but to protect the light she carried for them all. When the crowd's cheers faded, the sky burned orange above the kingdom. The wind carried the sound of bells across the towers. Ethan stood there beside her, knowing that peace would never last forever, but also knowing that whatever storms came next, they would face them together. The soldier and the queen, bound not by power, but by a promise written in courage and trust.